A good Erev Shabbos. Here we are coming into another quarantine Shabbos, not able to spend it as we'd like, gathering together with friends and enjoying the closeness of community. I've been wondering, maybe you have also, not only when we'll be able to come together again and daven and shmooze and enjoy the friendship of a kiddush together, a Yom Tov together, but also when we're able to do that, what's it going to look like? What will happen to handshakes and hugs? And will we all have to wear masks and gloves and all that? It'll be different, no doubt. I've been comforting myself in recent weeks by thinking and saying that the eternal project of the Jewish people is making the very best we can out of whatever situation we find ourselves in. It's particularly helpful when the Parsha that we're studying this week and reading this Shabbos speaks to our experience. Hopefully, you're taking a few minutes each Shabbos morning to read the Parsha for yourself, or even better, reading it along with an explanation or a commentary that gives some insight into what it means for us today. Parshas Emor speaks toward the end about making each day count, specifically counting the Omer, which we're in the middle of right now. This past week marked the halfway point between Pesach and Shavuot. If you care to click into our website each day, you'll find the counting of the Omer and a little spiritual insight into that for each day, unique to each day. The text itself, the Torah says, Daber el b'nei Yisrael va'amarta alehem ki savoyu el haaretz asher ani noisein lechem. God tells Moshe, tell the Jewish people that when they come into the land of Israel that I'm giving you, uktzartem es ktsira, you reap the harvest there. V'hevesem es omer reishis k'tzirchem el hakohen. You should bring the omer of your first harvest to the kohen. Rashi explains that an omer is a grain measure. Works out to be about 2.3 liters or so, a little more than half a gallon maybe. Then a few verses later, it says after you do this, you should count. It says, Usfartem lechem mimacharas ha-Shabbos. You should count from the day after the day of rest. Miyom haviachem es omer hatnufa, from the day you bring the omer of the waving, that amount of first barley offering you bring has to be waved when you bring it to the temple. Sheva shabbosos tamimos tiyena, 7 complete weeks you count. There's an interesting sort of cultural, historical footnote to the whole affair. It's a little bit ambiguous if you listened carefully to the verses, how it tells us to begin counting. Rashi says that Macharas HaShabbos, the day after the rest day, refers to the second day of Pesach. Pesach, day 1, is the day of rest, and then the day after that for us, here outside of Israel, it's the second day of Yom Tov, but in Israel, it's the first day of Chol HaMoed. That's when you bring your Omer offering, and that's when you start counting, as we do. You count 7 weeks, the day after that is Shavuos, which is also explained in this week's Parsha. Some fundamentalists, not anyone we know, God forbid, but in Jewish history, some camps insisted on a literal reading of the text. So where it says the day after Shabbos, the morrow of Shabbat, Macharat HaShabbat, the Sadducees, or Tzdukim in Hebrew, insisted on the uninterpreted meaning of the text. They didn't like a bunch of rabbis sitting around explaining things to them. So if it says the day after Shabbos, it means the day after Shabbos. How much clearer can that possibly be? So they insisted on counting the Omer, like the verses say, but from the first Sunday after Pesach. So whenever Pesach was, they would wait till Shabbos, and the day after Shabbat, on Sunday morning, they would start counting, count their own 49 days of the Omer, and wind up celebrating Shavuos a few days, or sometimes even a week, almost later than the rest of the Jewish people, insisting all the time, of course, that they were right and everybody else was wrong. You can imagine these people were a lot of fun to be around. Over time, they faded away after the Second Temple's destruction, 19 centuries ago. But we still remember these disputes, and in fact, there's another quasi-religion called the Karaites who might be their intellectual successors. But back to topics more relevant to our times. Although our situation is challenging, to say the least, we've all read things in the news in recent weeks about historical precedent for plagues and pandemics, from the Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago all the way back to the Black Plague in the 1300s. It seems every so often for all our knowledge and our ability to manage health crises, once in a while one comes along that threatens to overwhelm us. Humankind soldiers on and hopefully learns from the experience, but getting through it is no small challenge. Eventually, it ends though. There's a discussion of a plague a long time ago that attacked the students of Rabbi Akiva. It was the early 2nd century. You can find the explanation in the Talmud, Yevamos, Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis. It says there that a plague killed 12,000 pairs of Torah students, Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, and it stopped on the 33rd day of the Omer. 33 in Hebrew numerology is Lamed Gimel, or Lag, so Lag BaOmer, which is a mini holiday coming up this week on Tuesday. We're going to observe it by leaving out Tachanun of our prayers that day, and usually there's a big community picnic at one of the city parks, probably not this year, but hopefully next year. On Lag BaOmer, this plague relented, according to Tosfos Rabbeinu Peretz, and Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying, but not before it had claimed the lives of 24,000 of them, which is an awful lot. There's a most troubling etiology for this event given in that passage in the Talmud. It says, Lo nahagu kavod ze bazeh. The students of Rabbi Akiva did not treat each other with respect. That's kavod, not covid. Lo nahagu kavod ze bazeh. The students of Rabbi Akiva did not treat one another with respect, which leads the attentive reader to slap his or her forehead in amazement and say, wait a second, they didn't behave honorably among themselves? How can such a thing be? For any Jew not to honor and respect another is already astonishing. But for the students of Rabbi Akiva, what's Rabbi Akiva famous for, above and beyond anything else? The Yerushalmi in Nedarim says, Amar Rabbi Akiva, v'ahavta l'reach ha'kamoicha. Rabbi Akiva says, love your fellow as yourself. We had it last week's parsha. Ze klal gadol b'Torah. That's a major principle, or the major principle of the Torah. As Rabbi Akiva taught Torah, it came down to love your neighbor as yourself, and you're telling me 24,000 of his students failed to absorb this message? How on earth can that possibly be? Well, it seems they did and they didn't absorb the message. They did love each other as they loved themselves, but perhaps to a fault. These 24,000 Talmidim are referred to in the Talmud as 12,000 pairs. In other words, chavrusas, study partners. They would learn one-on-one in pairs, which is an excellent way to learn. Education professors have written books on this. They would learn with each other, and they would each try to convince the other to adopt their reading, their interpretation, their understanding of whatever material they were learning. Now you can see where the error crept in. Love another as yourself. They summoned up so much love for their study buddy that they could not bear to let the other person maintain their own interpretation, their own reading of the text, their own understanding. They insisted that you give up yours and you adopt mine in my place. If I really love you so much, how could I possibly allow you to persist in your, parentheses, wrong, close parentheses, belief? I have to correct it so you can learn it, you can read it the right way, which of course is my way. So you see where this is going. There's loving another as yourself, and then there's loving another so much so that you forcibly convert them to your own worldview. Then there's nohagin kavod ze bazeh, conducting ourselves with respect for one another so that we allow the other to hold his or her views just like they allow me to hold mine. Truth is, it's much easier to get along when everyone holds the same views, especially when they're the correct views, in other words, what I think. But we all know that life just isn't like that. It's a tremendous challenge to let the other be who he or she is and still love them, still respect them. That's the challenge that Lag BaOmer offers us. Can we love and respect one another even when our views diverge? I hope so. The experience we're going through right now with sitting at home and thinking about these things gives us a little bit of a luxury of time and quiet to think about how we can carry this out. As we mentioned last week, we're in a bit of seclusion and isolation like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was not only one of the very few disciples of Rabbi Akiva to have survived, his yortzeit is also, you guessed it, Lag BaOmer, coming up on Tuesday. Another reason to celebrate the specialness of that day. We mentioned last week that to avoid being captured and executed by the Romans, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had to go into seclusion, sheltering in place, hiding in a cave for 12 years, ultimately turned into 13 years, a bonus year. After 12 years, he emerged from his quarantine, but he still had a remnant of the judgmentalness toward others. He couldn't accept that people conducted themselves differently than he thought they should, pursuing livelihood and other quotidian concerns rather than devote themselves exclusively to Torah study, as he had done with his time in the cave. It took a heavenly voice of rebuke and another year of meditation in the cave for him to develop a kindly eye to gaze upon another with acceptance and understanding. This famous story from the Gemara in Shabbos seems to intimate strongly that even for the greatest among us, it's a challenging task to be able to look upon another with a charitable view, with kindness, with acceptance, with respect, with love. Again, it would be so easy if everyone just agreed on everything, but that's simply not the way the world works. Remember that Rabbi Akiva ultimately died as a martyr by the hands of the Romans, which was something he expressed a yearning for when he asked, Masa yavo liyadi ve'akayemena, when will I have the opportunity to sacrifice my whole being for the glory of God and His Torah, to die al kiddush Hashem? Truth is, we don't adopt this view, much as we love and honor Rabbi Akiva. Rather than dying al kiddush Hashem, we hope to be able to live al kiddush Hashem, so that when others look at us and see the way we live our Jewish lives day to day, year to year, under any and all circumstances, they will say, what a great God is this who has such a people who serve Him. Living al kiddush Hashem doesn't always get our pictures in the newspapers, but it's a life of fulfillment and purpose and nobility. As we move through the second half now of Sfirat HaOmer, now just a few weeks away from Shavuot, Hashem should help us to bring honor to Him and to the Jewish people and the Torah with everything we do, in that which is seen as well as that which is unseen. Good Shabbos.